Good afternoon. Well, depending on when you are in the country, because I know we have people joining us from every part of the country virtually. We are delighted that you're here. Welcome to the 2025 Schaalman Thought Leader Lecture. I am Grisel Rodriguez Morales, Rush Generations Program Director and part of the Schaalman Senior Voices team. Thank you so much for joining us today. During the month of May, did you know that we celebrate Older Americans Month and Mental Health Awareness Month? Yes, good. So it is quite fitting, yes, a round of applause for that. It's quite fitting that we'll be discussing the issue of ageism and how it affects our older adult population. Today's event is brought to you by Schaalman Senior Voices in collaboration with the E4 Center of Excellence for Behavioral Health Disparities in Aging, which is within the Center of Excellence in Aging. At this time, I'd like to let me start please by thanking the Schaalman team, the Rush Generations team, the Center for Excellence in Aging team for all their work and for making sure the event goes smoothly today as planned. So let's give them a round of applause. A bigger one, come on. Thank you so much. Schaalman Senior Voices is the next one. Thank you. It's a collection of programs, inspiring films, and educational opportunities that aim to strengthen the well-being of older adults and their communities. Schaalman Senior Voices honors the guidance and the legacy of interfaith leaders Rabbi Herman E. Schaalman, celebrating his 100 years of crossing boundaries, posing challenging questions, and promoting greater welfare for countless lives and communities. The thought leaders featured in these Schaalman Thought Leader Lectures are nationally and internationally recognized experts in aging and disability. Through these lectures, we seek to educate health professionals on best practices for older adults and to influence how they conceptualize what matters to older adults and individuals with disabilities. Today's excellent program and the Schaalman Senior Voices program at Rush will not be possible without one exceptional individual, Mark Fenton. Mark, hi, I know you're virtually here with us. Through his efforts and philanthropic support, Mark has given us the unique opportunity to establish a program that fulfills Rabbi E. Schaalman's legacy of crossing boundaries and bringing people together as we are doing here today. Mark, we greatly appreciate your guidance. Thank you for being closely involved in the design of Schaalman Senior Voices. I hope that you know that your support means the world to us. Our collaborative partner today is the E4 Center. That has to do with the CEUs. For those of you getting CEUs, I know that you read all of that in a second. So, okay. The E4 Center's mission is to engage, empower, and educate healthcare providers and community-based organizations in behavioral health for older adults and their families across the country. Today's event is being live streamed through the Rush Generations YouTube channel and through the virtual platform used by the E4 Center. So we hope that you engage in the conversation. Please ask questions throughout the lecture using the chat features in both platforms, not only the YouTube channel, but also the webinar. And we will monitor your questions throughout the event. We also have a microphone available in the room. So after Dr. Gentron is done speaking, we are going to have a Q&A. We are also offering continuing education credits. We want to point out, if you have already not seen that our speaker has declared not conflict of interest. And today's lecture offers one and a half hours of continuing education for most disciplines. After this lecture, those who pre-register will receive an email to claim the CEUs, and you'll have up to 10 days to complete the evaluation, which is required for the CEUs. So evaluate first, and then you'll get your credits. But to receive that email, you need to, and I don't know why this is advancing because I took care of that yesterday. But anyway, for those of us attending in person who will also like to claim CEUs, we need you to add your name and email address to one of the registration forms. As planned. Yeah, that's supposed to happen, just so you know. So anyway, I like to now introduce an esteemed colleague and champion in our field of aging, our AVP of Social Work and Community Health, Robin Golden.
Thank you, Griselle. We are honored to welcome Dr. Tracy Gendron, a true leader and change maker in the field of aging. Dr. Gendron serves as the chair of the Department of Gerontology at Virginia Commonwealth University and as executive director of the Virginia Center on Aging. You are an internationally recognized gerontologist with nearly 30 years of experience as a researcher, educator, and speaker. Her work is grounded in both scholarship and community action. And she's spoken globally about the real world impacts of age across and bias across healthcare, media, education, and policy. She is the author of the critically acclaimed book, Ageism Unmasked, Exploring Age Bias and How to End It, a call to action for reshaping how we think about age and ageism. You've received numerous awards for this work, and we're excited about that. In addition to your leadership roles, Dr. Gendron has a deep academic foundation. You hold a master's degree in gerontology and psychology and a PhD in developmental psychology. She continues to mentor future leaders, develop innovative research, and advocate for a world in which aging is seen as a time of growth and possibility, not decline. Today, she will guide us in exploring how we can contribute to ending ageism and building a society that truly values people across the lifespan. Dr. Gendron will challenge us to rethink what it means to grow older and how we can contribute to a more inclusive, age-positive society. Please join me in welcoming, with warm and enthusiastic welcome to Dr. Tracy Gendron.
Okay, I think I am good here. Let me take this out. Good afternoon, everyone. How are you? Good, and hi to everyone on Zoom. I hope that everyone's having a great day so far. I am just delighted to be here to have a conversation with you about a topic that is something I think about a lot and something that I really, really want to talk about, because there's so much power in how we see ourselves as aging people, how we see others as aging people. And I really do want this to be more of a conversation than a lecture. So I hope that we have some opportunity at the end for questions, for comments, for thoughts, but kind of, keep in mind how you're feeling right now, and then check in with yourself at the end to see if there's anything that really resonated with you, anything that makes you feel a little bit different than you thought. So I'm going to jump in by showing you a picture of the Great Sphinx of Giza. And you're probably going, well, why are you showing me a picture of that? We're talking about aging. We'll get there. So this is one of the most recognizable figures in Egypt. And it's something that every single one of us has seen over and over and over again, right? We all know what this is. But do you know this is also a picture of the Great Sphinx of Giza? It's actually makes perfect sense. It has a tail because it is the body of a lion and the head of a man. But we don't often look at this and think, I know exactly what this is. Aging is a lot like that. We recognize aging in the way that it has been presented to us. In other words, our perceptions create our truth about it. And when we're presented with the face of something, that's what it is that we start to understand and know. Aging is a lot like that. So today we're going to look at this side of aging. We're going to look at the side that we don't see and we don't talk about quite as much. Now, I have to preface by saying that every one of you thinks of your brain like this, that you tend to think of yourself sitting at the control center of your brain, kind of like in the movie Inside Out, that you have complete control over your emotions, that you know very well you're not biased because you can take in all of the information and process it. But here's the thing, our brains are really more like this. Our brains are really, really lazy. And they're lazy for a reason. We have a lot of stimuli that's coming at us. We're processing a lot of information all at the same time. And our brains have to take really quick cognitive shortcuts. This is how bias lives. So the point of me saying this is bias is built into the brain as a survival mechanism. It's not our fault. There's no blame and there's no shame. When we are presented with something over and over and over again and conditioned to believe certain things, we actually need to wake up our lazy brain and reprogram that so that we can see things in another way. And that's what we're going to do. So I want to start by talking about aging. Okay, what is aging and how do we misunderstand aging? Because this is the fundamental question when we're talking about ageism. When we walk through the door of aging, we fundamentally misunderstand it in a couple of different ways. First of all, we very, very commonly talk about the aging population. When we're talking about the aging population, what we really mean is older people. Who in the room or on Zoom is not aging? Anyone? No, we are all part of the aging population. So when we talk about it as if it's happening to other people or it's about other people, that's the first way that we disassociate from our own aging. The first way that we other and make it about somebody else. So how we talk about aging and whether we see ourselves as aging people really matters. The other way that we misunderstand aging is that we're all really familiar with how our bodies change over time. All really, really well versed. We talk about it a lot. We share these stories with each other. Yes, our bodies change over time. And the truth is, every single one of us is going to have decline in our bodies. We are mortal beings. Death is a part of life. So our bodies are going to change in terms of maybe some aches and pains, maybe some loss of stamina, definitely some loss of reserve capacity, where stress takes a deeper toll on us than we used to. And it's okay for us to acknowledge that and talk about that with each other. But when we see aging as just a process of biological change, we're actually missing most of what aging is about. The definition of aging is the change in biology, psychology, sociology, and spirituality that we have throughout our life. Aging is the simultaneous process of decline and growth. That's hard to wrap your head around because it's so contradictory. How can we decline and grow at the same time? But the truth is that we do. Aging is a process of living, of becoming, and of evolving. And when we miss talking about the ways that we grow as we age, we're actually missing its greatest gifts, the things that really make us who we are. So we want to contextualize aging. We don't want to reduce it down to just something that's about decline. We want to understand that it's about both decline and growth. And then that helps us see it in a completely different way. So I really want you to make this personal, because this is not about me. This is not about even changing policy. This is about you at this very moment. So I want you to think about these questions. What does being old mean to you? What does being young mean to you? And how do you feel about your own aging? Do you see yourself as someone that's aging? Are you getting older or are you growing older? Big difference between those two. Is it something that's happening to you, or is it something that you're actively taking a part in? And kind of check in with yourself about this. Also think about how you talk about aging and how you talk about yourself at your age. So let me ask you, and on Zoom, you can feel free to put this in the chat, but for those that are in the room, when I say the word old, what comes to mind? What are synonyms for old? Anything that comes to mind? Wise. What else? You can be as honest as you want to be, no judgment here. Aches, senior. Anything else? Mature. What about young? What comes to mind? Vigorous, energetic. Give me a couple more. Multitasker, carefree, maybe immature, perhaps immature. Okay, so here's what's really interesting about that. When we talk about old, we say everything from wise and experienced to many people will say aches and pains, or perhaps frail. Some people say grumpy, things like that. And when we say young, it can mean everything from immature to energetic and engaged. So what does this mean? It means that these words old and young have so much meaning that they're actually meaningless because we don't know how we're talking about them. The actual definition of old is longer lived. The actual definition of young is shorter lived. But we add value. And when we add value to these words, we add judgment to these words. And we live in a world where we very much have a preference for youth than we do over older age. So when we talk about age and being old in a negative way, and we elevate being young in a positive way, you can see how that contributes to the language of ageism and to our understanding of aging as a process of decline. So think about that. Just kind of keep that in mind about how you use those words and how you think about yourself. When we're talking about aging, there's something that's super interesting about it. While aging is the one thing that every human being on the planet has in common, without exception, every single human being is aging every moment of their lives. No two people age in the same way. So when you look at the person sitting to the left of you, the person sitting to the right to you, you're going to have vastly different experiences with aging. Well, why is that? Well, because we're all born with different identities. We're born living in different areas, whether that's a city or a rural area, with different opportunities and different barriers. We choose some of these identities along the way, like the type of education we pursue or the type of career that we have. Some of them change over time, okay? But all of these things together create very unique experiences for each person. So you have to recognize the individuality that comes with aging. And that when you are looking or working with someone who's 65 or 75 or 85, they are the culmination of their life's experiences. Everything that has happened to them that they have experienced throughout their entire lives makes up who they are as a person. So aging is incredibly unique. In fact, as we grow older, we get less and less like each other and more individual because these experiences are so individual. So when we're talking about person-centered, this is what we have to recognize, that it's all of these pieces that come into the process. And those pieces on both an individual level and a structural level are what can create some kind of barriers or opportunities. So for example, I live in a city that has a road that goes about 5 miles down Broad Street. And they did a study a few years ago, probably 10 years ago, and they looked at life expectancy all along this 5-mile path. And what they found was shocking. What they found was that 5 miles up the road to a predominantly white and affluent community, from 5 miles down the road to a predominantly African American and income insecure community, there was a 20-year differential in life expectancy. 20 years within 5 miles. So social determinants account for some of that. This accounts for some of that. In the neighborhood down the road, they didn't have a grocery store until like 3 years ago. They were cut off from access to a lot of different amenities that are in the area. So it's important for us to think about how all of these pieces of our identities create unique paths. Aging is also a really interesting form of identity, or age is an interesting form, because when you think about it, we are constantly forming and reforming our age identity. We feel differently at 20 than we do at 40, than we do at 60, than we do at 80. And the world responds to us differently at those ages. So we are constantly forming and reforming who we are as a person based on our age. So it's a really fluid form of identity that is something that we need to kind of keep an eye on as we age, to kind of figure out how we feel about that and how the world responds to it. So it's all about the nuance. Aging is all about the nuance. It's about growth and decline. It's about being human in something we are all experiencing, and also recognizing that it's each unique person that does it differently. We have to look at these contradictory kind of mechanisms and ways that we respond to the world and recognize that this is not a clean-cut case. This is something that is complicated and beautiful, but we can embrace that nuance and we can embrace the complexity of it to really understand the gifts that aging brings. So I'm a developmental gerontologist. I have studied development my whole life, from looking at what happens in infancy and toddlerhood and childhood and adolescence, and how we continue to grow over time. And what I have learned, especially over the past couple of years, is that while we have a language that we readily understand what development looks like throughout our lives, we get to adulthood and we just kind of stop at adulthood. And then maybe we talk about older adulthood, but we really focus heavily on adulthood. And there's a problem with that. What if there was more? What if there was a whole other stage of life and stage of development past adulthood that had different opportunities, had different milestones, had different markers, had different purpose? We just had a wonderful conversation before this about what's different between adulthood and elderhood. And there are many things that are different. The busyness of adulthood, the striving to accomplish our careers or have kids. Well, how's elderhood different? And what if we saw productivity and contribution in elderhood in a different kind of way? Then we might see the values of elders in a different kind of way. So not everybody likes the term elderhood, and that is okay. We've really tried to move away from talking about elderly for a long time. When I was talking about this in Canada, they also had a real pushback to the word, because the word elder is really associated with their Indigenous community, and they didn't want to feel as if that they were appropriating that. But I think it needs its own term. And part of that is because, what do we call later life right now? We call it retirement, right? That's what we use to describe later life. Retirement is not a life stage. Retirement is a social institution. Retirement tells me that you used to work somewhere. And it tells me that maybe you finished those working years, but that's who you are as a person. It doesn't tell me who you are, and it doesn't tell me who you're becoming. To think about creating a whole life stage based on a term that's about withdrawal of who I used to be is really powerful. But elderhood is strengths based, and it talks about who I am becoming, why I get up in the morning, why I matter, and why I have purpose. And I think that there's just so much potential in that. We need to recognize a couple things. We need to recognize that with this demographic shift that we are having, where we're going to have more people over the age of 65 than under 18, starting around 2030, you're going to have more older people that can't retire because they can't afford to retire. You're going to have older people that don't want to retire because work brings them a lot of purpose and meaning. And we're actually going to need people to not retire, because we don't have enough people that are working, right, to support for Social Security and all of their kinds of things. So the landscape is shifting, and the demographics demand that the landscape is shifting. So this idea of moving from retirement to elderhood holds even more purpose and potential. So why do you think we don't have an understanding of elderhood? Why do you think this language doesn't exist? Well, there are a few reasons for it, but number one, it's really profitable to have an anti-aging industry, really profitable. There are billions of dollars being made on shaming us into thinking that we need to look, act, and feel younger. And the profits just keep going. This is an enormously powerful marketing campaign that has really dug into this idea that you have a customer for life, because we can't stop aging, by the way, and they can't make us look like we stop aging. So once you're in it, you're a customer for life. And they keep looking at younger and younger and younger people to start that shame earlier. So there's some really powerful capitalistic forces that are at play that would prefer that we don't have the term elderhood, that would prefer that we don't see growing older as aspirational because they benefit from us fearing it. So again, once they sell you that idea, you're a customer for life. So ageism, in the form of an anti-aging industry and the way we feel about ourselves and other people, it's all around us. It's one of those things that once you see it, you start to see it everywhere. It's in the songs we sing, it's in the books that we read, it's in the movies that we watch, it's in the advertisements that we see. Terms like ageless, denying our age, terms like look, feel younger, it's all out there. And we've gotten so used to it over decades and decades that we don't even really see it anymore. But once you do, just look, try going to buy a birthday card, take a deep breath before you go in there. My kids still, they're adults and they still won't go in there with me to buy a card because I embarrass them. It just shows you, how deep and pervasive this really is. So I typically get a question at the end of a presentation when I'm talking about this, that isn't ageism in this form directed more at women than at men? And it's a kind of yes and no thing. So I think gendered ageism is a thing. And with women, I think it's kind of this disparity of being hypervisible and invisible all at the same time. Hypervisible in terms of appearance, right? Do you have gray hair? Do you have wrinkles? Have you taken care of yourself? Body image, all of these things, diet culture, this all fits into this specifically for women. But many older women also feel as if their contributions are ignored. They're less likely to get a promotion. It takes longer to find a new job when you're older. So I think there's kind of that dichotomy. But older men experience it as well. So who wants to guess what's the top product marketed to older men? What is it? Not Rogaine. What is it? Viagra. Yep, it is erectile dysfunction. Exactly. And so just think about that for a moment and what that means about being an older man or a successful older man, right? The assumptions that go along with that. We don't talk about men and caregiving and nurturing as much. We tend to talk more about, well, older men need hair dye and Viagra. So there's shame that goes into that too, right? It's just packaged differently than it is for women. So it's important to recognize that it is both, right? It's equal opportunity for capitalistic opportunities. So what does this do? So this creates a lot of stereotypes about aging and about being old. So let me explain to you what ageism is, because I want to make sure that we're on a level playing field, because ageism is actually much more complicated than a lot of people think. Ageism is every time we stereotype somebody based on their age, whether that somebody is seen as older or younger than us. Okay, so it goes both ways, but it's anytime we make a judgment, an assumption, a stereotype about somebody. You're too old to understand this. You're too young to understand this. We're kind of leading with ageism if that's the characteristic that we're using. So that's external ageism. But ageism is also internalized. It's directed towards ourselves. When we have thoughts of, I don't want to get old, I don't want to be around those old people, even though I myself might be an older person, I feel shame, dread, anxiety. That's all internalized ageism. I'm too old to learn something new. I'm too old to make a change. All of those things that we tell ourselves, that's internalized ageism. And that has really big consequences. So it's externally related, it's internally related, and it lives within our relationships. The compliments that we often give each other. Oh, you haven't aged a bit. You look great for your age. And then we take that in and we absorb it. And because we think it's a compliment, it feeds that sense of internalized ageism and then perpetuates itself back into society. So, what it leads to is things like this. It leads to both positive and negative stereotypes that we have about both young people and older people. Old people are lazy and entitled, or young people are lazy and entitled. All young people want a trophy for showing up. All old people are not going to be able to use technology. Every time we kind of dance this dance and we lead ourselves into these, we are making an assumption or a judgment or an ageist action towards somebody or towards ourselves. So, why does this matter? We have decades of research that show that how we feel about our own aging matters to our physical health and our mental health and our longevity. Decades of research that show that when we fear growing older, we're actually more likely to manifest the very things that we fear. So we're at increased risk of being socially isolated, even if it's a self-imposed isolation. Again, I don't want to associate with old people, even though I'm an older person. I'd rather just stay by myself. That can lead to loneliness. So it's an increased risk of social isolation, of loneliness, of depression, of anxiety, even of suicidal ideation. And that was my own research that we published about a year ago that showed that the highest risk factor for suicidal ideation in my study was internalized ageism and people feeling a sense of, I don't want to be a burden. I don't want to, grow older and not have purpose, not have meaning in my life. So again, what's so funny about it is that when we internalize these thoughts and feelings about aging, we're actually like triggering the stress response that makes us more likely to manifest these very things. So it becomes kind of this self-fulfilling prophecy. Even people that are exposed to negative stereotypes about aging are more likely to exhibit memory loss and depression. So it just kind of manifests itself. It also has risks for our physical health. Research has showed us that it takes longer to recover from illness when you have very, very dark feelings about your own aging, when you really think of yourself as somebody that is just declining. And it also is decreased in terms of our longevity. There was a study done from Yale over 20 years ago that showed that people with positive views of aging lived an average of 7.5 years longer than people with negative views of aging, which is really amazing to me that that was 20 years ago and we still don't readily talk about this. We talk about other public health concerns. We talk about the need to use sunscreen. We talk about the risk factors of smoking, but we don't talk about the risk factors just from how you feel about your own aging. And yet that's something that every one of us can do for ourselves, can just start to reframe and start to think about. So it's impacting our physical health, it's impacting our mental health. As many of you know, given where you work and what you do, there's also a tremendous impact in healthcare. Again, another study showed ageism costs $63 billion a year in healthcare costs, $63 billion a year. Now, that's for a few reasons. Number one, it's because of the manifestation of those things, right? So again, when we have those negative feelings about aging, we're more likely to manifest depression and cognitive impairment and all of that. but it's also because of interactions that we have in healthcare settings. And I will preface this by saying, I don't blame physicians. I don't. Do you know, I think 96% of medical school programs have requirements for pediatric rotations, only 10% for geriatric rotations. It is not embedded in the curriculum. It is not something that we are taught. But aside from that, the system itself doesn't support it. When you think about how people are reimbursed, when you think about the need to visit with people very quickly, it doesn't really account for some more of the nuances and the time that we need to spend with people that have complex conditions or comorbidities. So the system itself is ageist and doesn't support it. But so what happens if you don't have geriatrics training, you don't have time to see this person in front of you, you end up at a higher risk for misdiagnosing, you end up at a higher risk for infantilizing. Oh, sweetie, what do you expect? You're 80, you're going to have pain. Right? This is what happens. You end up at a higher risk for infantilizing by talking to the person who came with the older adult to ask them questions instead of centering the conversation about the older adult. I was once with my dad at a festival, and he has a really bad back, so he needed to sit, and there was nowhere to sit. So we just had to like find a place for him to sit on the ground and lean up against a pole. And a very well-meaning attendant came right up, and he and I are both sitting there and looked directly at me. Is he okay? I'm like, ask him. Why are you asking me? And again, it's very well-meaning and well-intending, but this is kind of the cycle that we've gotten into. So it's really important that we think about this in terms of medical interactions, because one of the things we know is once you've been dismissed, you're less likely to seek care. And then you all know what that leads to, right? When we don't invest in preventative care, when we say, I'm not going back there again because they just dismissed my concerns. They said I'm 80 and I should have pain. Then that causes even more problems. So it's systemic when it comes to healthcare. So I wanted to take a moment to talk about generations, because generations are really nonsense. They are these kind of catch-all terms that we use to talk about people that were born within a 15 to almost 20-year span. Okay, and this is the generations that we talk about now, from the silent generation, boomers, millennials, down to Gen Alpha. And here's the thing about generations. First of all, who decided when one started and where one ended? Anyone? ChatGPT can't tell me. Like, who decided this? Who decided what they were called? Another thing that just kind of happens, they are super arbitrary, except I will say the baby boomers at least were for a reason. There were over 3 million births in those post-World War II years, so it makes sense. But when we talk about generations and we talk about it in terms of stereotypes, right, then this is what it leads to. Well, all baby boomers need to have the office a certain way or need, flexibility in a certain way. All people that are Gen Z and millennial, if you don't do it this way, they're not going to come to work. It leads to these ridiculous assumptions. And this is another thing that we have created a multi-billion-dollar industry out of, is training people how generations should work together. Who are you talking about within a generation? When you go back to that slide about all the different forms of our identity, and you realize that generation, or when we were born, is just one contributing factor, you realize that not everybody in a generation could possibly have the same likes or dislikes or habits. They can't. So generational research is flawed, and it's flawed in a couple of fundamental ways. Number one, it cannot pick apart a cohort effect from a historical effect from a lifespan effect. Most generational research, if not all, looks at people at one point in time. So it's not actually looking at generations. It's looking at the difference between someone who's 80 right now and someone who's 20 right now. That's not generational. Generational would be looking at a 20-year-old compared to a 20-year-old at that time. And then that doesn't account for historical effects. You can even think of COVID in this way. COVID affected everybody really differently. It wasn't a blanket effect on people of a certain age. So I think we need to really be thoughtful when it comes to generations. And I want to give you an example that I want you to kind of keep in mind next time you think of, well, if they're a boomer, it must mean this. Here are 3 boomers. Yep, take that in for just a second. That is King Charles, that is Sam Jackson, and that is my mom. These are 3 baby boomers. Now, you cannot tell me that these 3 people have the same likes, dislikes, and life experiences. They clearly do not. So the next time you are thinking about a baby boomer, remember my mom, right? And then remember King Charles, and you'll have that kind of idea of what baby boomer am I talking about. When you look at it like this, I think it's so helpful to understand kind of how ridiculous it is that we do this. And I bring this up because it is another form of ageism. It's another way that we are making an assumption about somebody based on their age. So think of my mom next time. Who knows what this is? Anyone? What about that? You know what that is? Yeah. Okay, so follow me here for a second. Right after the pandemic, when we started going back out to restaurants, and you know what they ended up doing was they took away the physical menus from restaurants, and then they ended up using the QR codes for them. So this was right after first time that we had gone back out to a restaurant. I was at a restaurant with my parents. At the time, they were in their late 70s. And we didn't get the physical menus, but they had this little QR code. So my mom was like, she was watching what we were doing. And so she took out her phone, but she started to get frustrated because she was just taking a picture of the QR code. So I showed her, I was like, hover over it, and then you can do it and see it. And it got me thinking, how was she supposed to know how to use a QR code? Did anyone ever give her instructions? Did anyone ever teach her how to do this? So technology is great if we know how to use it. But for many older people, they've never been given the opportunity to understand. So you don't know what that is because you've never used it. It's a 3D foot scanner for orthotics, in case you were wondering. Now you know that's what it is. But of course you wouldn't know what that is because you don't have a need for it, just like my mom didn't know what it was because she had never encountered it before. So when it comes to older people and technology, thinking about, oh, older people just can't use technology. They are just not savvy. They weren't born with it. They weren't raised with it. Maybe that's a piece of it. There is a learning curve, but maybe it's because we haven't developed the infrastructure to help people use it. And when we are developing products and services for older people, we're often not asking or involving them in the process. So we have to think about this as a whole. This also extends to AI. AI is just a large data model, right? It's taking tons and tons and tons of data points and it's pulling them together to kind of summarize it well. Well, whose voices are represented in AI and whose voices are not? Older people's voices are not. So AI, really what it does is it has the potential to just replicate ageism because it still is not including the voices and the desires and the wants of older people. And very often when we don't do that, we're walking in by making assumptions about what we think older people might want or what we think older people might need without centering them in the conversation. So we need to be mindful of how this is going to play out in a world with technology and AI as well. I also wanted to touch on this intersection. You get it? It's the evil twins. Yeah, The Shining, in case anybody knows, of ageism and ableism. So ageism is discrimination based on age, and ableism is discrimination based on ability. And while they are 2 very distinct things, and people can experience ableism all throughout their lives at any age of their lives, many people live all their lives with a disability. Many will experience disabilities throughout their lives. Because aging is that simultaneous process of decline and growth, the likelihood is we are going to experience both ageism and ableism at some point in our life. And you have to realize that the world is very much built with structural ageism and ableism embedded in the fabric of society. Think about going to like a fancy restaurant. So first of all, you sit down, Okay, you have your friends, there's mood lighting, there's music in the back, they give you the menu. It's in this really small, loopy font. You can't read it, right? Your eyes are not going to let you read that. And it's dark, right? So it's dark, you can't read it. Now you're trying to have conversations with the people that you're with, but the music is right behind you. So you can't hear anything either. This is an example of structural ageism and ableism built into the fabric of our worlds. You know, when you have a disability, if you've ever been on crutches or you've ever broken anything, you start to realize how fast the world moves really, really fast. It's not built for older people. It's not built for people that drive slower, that walk slower. So these are all of the ways that people can experience this within society. Imagine if we went from a world where we thought, you know, yes, I am aging and I have, you know, problems with my knees, but I can still do XYZ. Imagine if we went from that to, yes, I am aging and I have problems with my knees, and I'm also really excited about the ways that I'm growing. We can move from yes, but to yes, and. And just that simple shift can lead us to a place of embracing our aging and embracing the age that we are, embracing the nuance. Again, this comes back to nuance. We can have contradictory things happening to us at the same time. And we can recognize that both of those things can actually help us become who we are. There's this concept in Botswanan culture, and I think it's called Botsofe. I don't know how to pronounce it correctly. But it basically says, what if we leaned into the idea that we needed to have physical decline in order to reach spiritual potential? What if that was the body's way of saying, I need to slow down so that I can turn inward and I can evolve to the next stage of being? That's a yes, but to a yes, and, right? To recognizing how all of these pieces work together. So I also wanted to touch on this idea of successful aging because it's something that we toss around and something that, you know, we readily use. Who's aging successfully? Well, if you woke up this morning and you are breathing right now, you're aging successfully. Y'all are doing a great job at aging. You are here, you are smiling, it is good. This idea of successful aging is one that I really think has potential to be dismantled. When we first in gerontology coined this term successful aging, it was defined as three things: having cognitive ability, having physical ability, and being engaged with life. That's what led us right to this intersection of ageism and ableism. It's not realistic of us to think that I have to have physical ability in order to be successful. Even someone with any kind of disorder, dementia as well, can be successful, can find joy, and they can determine how they define it for themselves. So here's the thing: we don't want to get caught in the trap of projecting our current self onto our future self in terms of defining success. Let me give you an example. This is me and my dad. I love pictures of my family in here. So I was 2 years old at the time, and my dad was 27, very 70s, yes? The beard, the whole, like, yes. So if you would have asked my dad at that time in his life what successful aging would have looked like for him, he would have said something like, if he could play football, if he could smoke because he smoked then, and if he could bet on the horses because he was obsessed with it at the time, when he was 70, then he would be successful in later life. Well, my dad just turned 80. And success for my dad now is nothing like that. Now he wants to watch football, he wants to compose music, and he wants to spend time with his family and go swimming and go for a bagel every month with me, because that's our thing. Totally different. But 27-year-old dad could never have imagined that. If he would have projected his current self onto his future self, he would have set himself up for failure. You don't know who you're going to be. You don't know what you're going to value. You don't know what you're going to like or how you want to spend your time. Just because you're an avid mountain biker now doesn't mean that if you don't have that when you're 80, you won't be happy. You haven't met your 80-year-old self yet. You don't know. So when we project our current self onto our future self, we're setting ourselves up. If you would have asked me at this age how I would have defined success, I would have told you as long as I got to eat SpaghettiOs, I would have been fine. No longer is that the case. So just like now, I'm not going to tell you as long as I have an easy bake oven, right? These are things that were a past version of me, but not a future version of me. So we have to contextualize the aging experience. So there's some good news here, and I want to share the good news. The good news is that when each one of us starts to see our own aging differently, that's when change happens. And we've done stuff like this before. You know, I was looking around at magazines to see how far back I could find an example of something that was just blatantly ageist. And I found this Ladies' Home Journal from 1959 and saw right there on the cover that it said how to look and feel 20 years younger. And I'm like, okay, that explains a lot because it explains how long these messages have been floating around in the ether unchecked without an alternative. So it also explains why so many older people have never been presented a different way to look at this. It's just how we grew up with it. So I took this home and showed it to my husband and was like, all right, we got to take a picture of this to put it on. And then I saw this. Yes, read that. Help for unresponsive wives, making marriage work. And I said, well, first my husband said, I hope that means women in a coma. I said, I don't think so, but let's read the article to see if we can find out. So we read the article, and the article indeed is everything that you think it is and more. So it talks about internal and external defects that women have, defects that cause marriage not to work. Yep. And some of these things are, do you neglect to groom your hair or your nails? Do you wear too much makeup or not enough? Do you ignore promises? Do you swear or use coarse language? That's bullshit. Complete and total bullshit. But this was 1959. This was what the culture was like. So again, to me, this is aspirational because you would not see this today. We've worked really hard to make changes. We've really worked hard to look at gender roles in a completely different way. So if we change that, then we can change this. It just takes each one of us. Here's another fun example. Who knows the game of life? Love the game of life. I used to play this all the time. So the game of life originated in 1860 and the modern version came out in 1960. And they've done a really nice job of kind of updating the game board every few years. So they update it as the zeitgeist changes. So now instead of just pink or blue pegs, they have rainbow colored pegs. So you can choose what you like and what you feel connected to. Instead of just having kids, they have pets. So cool. So they do all of these things to kind of update it. But here's what hasn't changed. Where does the game of life end? Okay, I want you to take this in for a second. Where does the game of life end? It ends at retirement. Yeah, the game of life ends at retirement. And to make it worse, how do you win? When you have the most money. There's some really deep messages in this. Really deep opportunities for us to say, how do we envision a way of teaching our kids and teaching ourselves to be more aspirational than this? And what's really surprising is when you look at the 1860 version, this is the original version of the game of life, it was much more developmental. So it started at infancy, and look, it ended at a happy old age. That's so nice. But now, nope, now we've moved away from a happy old age. And instead, what we have is retirement. And if you lose, you are declared destitute and disgraced, reduced to living on Social Security. Ouch. Yes, big time ouch. So, this is the game of life. So, we have some things that we need to do because we can change the story about the game of life. We can change the narrative about aging. So at this point, I think I've laid a lot on you. There's a lot of pieces to this. There's a lot of parts to this. And you're probably thinking to yourself, but what do I do? How do I change the narrative about aging? And it's really simple. You have to rethink your own age. This is about you. This is about each one of us. we can take the power back and say, I'm going to reclaim my power, my age, just where I am right now, right? And there are ways that we can all do this. We can think differently. One of the first things we can do is a super quick gerontology 101. Understand what's expected in aging and what we can possibly modify with aging. And when it comes to biological aging, 25% of our aging comes from our genes. So the rest of it is all about the choices that we make, the environment that we live in, things like that. There are certain things biologically that are going to happen to all of us as we age. Gray hair, wrinkles, changes to eyesight. These are all things that just happen over time. But a lot of the things that we think are going to happen are actually modifiable risk factors, things that we can invest in early on, like our brain health and like our mental health. And I love putting this on here. Get hearing aids if you can't hear. It is one of the most modifiable risk factors for the development, thank you, of cognitive decline. I wish I could get my dad to do it. He won't do it, but my husband did. So these are all potential things. And what's right at the top of the list is your outlook on aging. Your outlook on aging is a modifiable risk factor. That's why we rethink our age. That's why we take a moment to really check in with ourselves about how do I feel about my own aging? How do I talk about my own aging and what are some ways that I can grow? So we can rethink about biology. We can think about the gifts and opportunities of later life and elderhood. Again, these are the things that people don't talk about as much. In later life, we have incredible strengths. We also have research on this. We are driven by purpose. We do want to matter. We do want opportunities to give back and to engage with people. We have increased ability for enhanced coping skills. You know, I think in many ways, later life is a time of wisdom, but not in the way that you might think. Wisdom to be who we are because we know ourselves better. There's a freedom that comes with shedding layers of not knowing who you are and feeling a sense of like, this is me. This is who I am. I'm going to say what I think and I'm going to feel okay about that. That's a strength of later life, to recognize that we have resilience, that our brains are still plastic, that we are developing new connections and new neurons, to recognize that in later life, we reprioritize things. Why? Because we start to see time differently. When we have a shift from the time that we have lived to the time that we have left, we start to think about how I want to spend that time. And I don't want to spend it in a toxic relationship. I want to spend it with the people that mean something to me. I want to spend it in smaller relationships, right? Fewer people, but the ones that nurture my soul. That's a shift in the way we see time. That's the power of elderhood. That's the power of later life. And we do this sociologically as well. We tend to choose the activities that nurture us. And for many of us, that includes adapting to activities in a new and different way. So again, maybe I can't ride my bike, but maybe I have found a way to coach others to do it or to be involved somehow in a way that is meaningful to me. Maybe there's new social roles that I can find. So these are all of the ways that we can think about later life and think about it with possibility and think about it with meaning and purpose. There's something that's called the positivity effect that happens in later life, where we tend to see more of the positives coming out of interactions than younger people might. These are all ways that our brain has developed and evolved over time. So we can think about aging differently. So I want you to leave here remembering at least one of these things and to take it with you and to hope that it gives you something to kind of noodle on over the next few months, years. But let's all remember together that people are individuals. When you've met one person that's 80 or one person that's 30, you've met one person that's 80 or one person that's 30. It's too unique of an experience to generalize it to all 80-year-olds or 30-year-olds. We have to remember that age alone does not predict ability. Age, in fact, in and of itself is a poor predictor of anything. And ability does not predict success. We get to define success, and we get to redefine it as we grow older. We can remember that we are all aging. The one universal thing that connects every single one of us, aging is not synonymous with old. Aging is all of us. And we can remember that generations are not homogenous. Let's use them for what they are. You want to see a trend? That's fine. You want to look at a specific behavior? Not so much. And let's start to think about elderhood as a stage of life. What if we thought of growing older as aspirational? What if we thought of it as something that I could look forward to? I'm excited that I can have the freedom to be me, to express myself, dress the way I want to dress, say the things I want to say, whether I work or whether I don't work, that I have the ability to contribute and find meaning and purpose. These are all things that we can use as starting points to rethink growing older. And then I want you to think about getting yourself in sync. So when I do a talk like this, invariably someone will come up and say, well, I'm 70, but I feel like I'm 50. No, you don't. You're 70 and you feel like you're 70. It's just not what you thought 70 was going to feel like. We have to get in sync. I am 54. I feel 54 and I look 54. This is what it looks like and feels like for me. If anyone else here is 54, yours might look and feel completely different than mine. But when we say, I feel younger, we're actually like giving away all of the hard lessons that we learned. We're just dismissing that. You don't actually want to be a younger version of yourself. You've worked too hard to get here. If you think about things over the past 5 years, 10 years, 15 years that you've worked really hard to achieve, maybe it's a skill, maybe it's just the way that you cope with life differently, maybe it's a hard lesson learned. You don't want to go back. You've earned that age. You've earned that right. So we need to get in sync with how our age feels, the way that we are at this moment, and all of the gifts that come with that, and how hard we've worked to achieve it. So ultimately, how we rethink our age and the step forward that we can all take together is that we can own our age. We can be proud of the age that we are, and we can role model that for everyone else. Every one of you is a role model. When you're talking about your own age with others in the community, with your kids, with your partners, with whomever, the way you talk about it matters, because that's how we teach others. So as I wrap this up, I'm going to make you all do something, whether you want to do it or not. I'm going to make you. And on the count of 3, we're all going to say our age out loud. And on Zoom, if you feel like putting it in the chat, feel free to do so. Okay? Are we ready? Okay, 1, 2, 3. 54. Very well done. Thank you so much, everyone.
Some people were quiet. What happened with that? Any questions right now? Thank you so much, Dr. Gendron. You've given us so much to think about.
Ready? Okay.
Thank you. Adam Scheffler, it wouldn't be a Schaalman lecture without me asking the first question. First of all, let me just quote from the Medicare website, hearing aids. Medicare doesn't cover hearing aids.
I know.
Or exams for fitting hearing aids.
I know.
And then, Medicare Advantage, we won't even go there with the downside of the upside of this particular item. The other thing is, I can't disagree with anything you said. However, I'm just wondering if the analysis could go further. Ageism is really just a form of other things that are like structural in our economy and in our culture. So, the idea of success applied to anything here versus like what's real, what's realistic. If we still talk about, we don't want to say aging successfully, but we also want to talk about redefining success. I think we need to get rid of the idea of success before we can, maybe get healthier ideas about aging.
Yeah, well, and I think it's about recognizing that that definition of success changes over time. So again, what's successful to you right this moment may not be how you define success later in life. It could mean all different kinds of things. But yes, it would be nice to get rid of the arbitrary beauty standards that we have, the arbitrary standards of what means success for people, because it's never going to mean that for all people, and then that ends up closing doors. But I also do want to say, yes, ageism is structural, and yes, it's cumulative and it combines with everything else. But to me, the power is the internalized ageism and how we feel about our own aging, because that is something that every one of us can decide to change at any moment, is just shifting our mindset about it. So thank you for the comment. Yes.
Hi, fellow proud 54-year-old person.
Woohoo!
Woohoo!
Yay,
1970.
1970.
Yes, 1970. Okay, I really appreciate this and the idea of claiming it, owning it, not putting judgment on it. I frequently will find myself saying, I'm old, I wear glasses and hearing aids.
Yeah.
And I really appreciate you calling out the hearing aids too, or naming that as something that can help us so much, because I am trying to train myself not to say those things and just without judgment. I need my reading glasses, I need my hearing aids, and I need them every day.
Yeah.
And it has made a huge difference for me. And just to point out that the rush, so for a lot of us that are rush employees here, our health insurance does finally, unfortunately, after I got mine, but it does cover them now. So you will not,
Yay.
instead of paying $5,000, you might pay more like 1,000. So it is still a great deal, but it's a lot better.
Good.
So I just want to thank you for naming the stuff that you named. It's really
Absolutely.
meaningful.
Thank you. And I'm glad to hear that. I keep hoping that things like hearing aids will become less stigmatized, as like wearable technology just becomes ubiquitous. Like everyone has something in their ears all the time, right? All of us, we're constantly walking around with things in our ears. So why are hearing aids still so stigmatized? I'm not sure. Any other questions, comments? Right behind you, actually.
Okay, so I'm wondering if you could help problem solve with reframing something.
Yeah.
So we had this amazing study out of Rush that showed that we did a study of mobility in, the preventive medicine, not we, not me, but at Rush, we did a study of mobility in predominantly Black churches in the West Side. And one of the things that was the key finding that was because of the burden of chronic conditions and the impact of social determinants of health, a lot of these people in predominantly Black churches had mobility markers that you would typically see of people in their 70s and 80s when those people were in their 40s and 50s. And that was like this huge finding to show that, like, obviously this is a huge impact of the social determinants of health and race on mobility. But how do you reframe that in a way that doesn't attach mobility to age when those were the markers they were looking at? Because I'm trying to talk about that in a literature review, but trying to reframe that part.
Yeah, I would suggest what you're just talking about is limited mobility, right? So maybe not comparing it to any particular age, but recognizing that their functionality and the abilities that they do have are far less than comparable groups of people, right? So you're not necessarily using age as a marker, but just kind of saying the expectation is they would be kind of at this level, but it's much less than that. But I also think it's okay in that instance to compare, because you're talking about like research and comparisons. You're not making a judgment about any one person based on their age. So I personally wouldn't find that to be a problem either.
Hi, Joy Gutzenberg. I think a couple of people, maybe some of the questions were maybe trying to get a little deeper in recognizing the whole social determinants of health
Yeah.
in the area of aging. And so apart from hearing aids that we all know is really a big problem in terms of, the funding for them, I was thinking about some less privileged communities than mine and how difficult it may be. I have every privilege you could imagine, education and et cetera, et cetera. And I am really struggling with my own way to think about my age. And so, but I have a lot more resources than a lot of people do that are helping me because I can pay for that. You know, I can afford that class. I can take that vacation. I can, you know, do things. So I'm just wondering again, like more of the context of social determinants and how some people aren't going to be able to do a lot of these things
Mhm.
that the most privileged of us are probably struggling with, if we're honest too.
Yeah, yeah, and that's obviously, a very real thing. Also, the effect of cumulative forms of discrimination over time. There was just a really interesting article that came out that was looking at the intersection of ageism and racism. And what struck me about it, it was Andrew Stewart who did this. And what struck me about it was the older adults that he had interviewed for this often couldn't tell whether they were experiencing racism or ageism. Like they couldn't just parse it apart, right? And I think that then you add on to that, sexism, and it gets layered and layered, and there's more risk the more isms you add on to it. And yes, the effect of these social determinants of health, I guess, what I was kind of saying before, it's also cumulative over a lifetime. So I was driving the other day, and I was driving through an area and saw a bus stop that had absolutely no shelter, that was on a hill. I know, that had no benches, that had nothing. And it made me think about things like that, like the structural elements that impact those social determinants of health. Whereas, you'd have a bench or in another community. So I think in order to address it, we need to think about it systemically from the built environment all the way up to, the individual person that we're dealing with. But yes, there's these structural elements that just cut off services, make transportation harder, make accessing healthcare harder, and that's just going to accumulate over time. So it's going to become more and more and more resonant as we age. Yeah.
So we actually have a question from Zoom. It was saying basically, how do you handle people who say older ages statements kind of in the same line of, I'm not going to the senior center, I don't want to hang around with old people, that sort of thing.
That is the question, and we could do like a whole session just on how do you respond, because responding is really hard in the moment. It depends on the person, it depends on the situation, it depends on if you feel like you can say, what are you talking about, you're old, and that's great. I'm old too, and it's okay to be old. It really just depends on the situation that you're in. But that is a session that, again, we'll do another time. We'll role play.
I also could maybe ask a question. I was really pulled in by the anecdote you said about like this side was of the street was more so, or down the mile, 5 miles down the
Yes,
road
yeah.
was African American poor health outcomes. 20 years, you
Yep,
said,
yep.
life expectancy difference. How can we talk about aging if there's actually that disparate, outcomes? Like, older adults starts at 60 or 65, I believe. So how do we talk about that when these ranges vary so much across and people have different priorities, and like we're saying, the biases that we live through and go through? Like, how do you sort of get to that?
Again, I think it's all of these things. It's thinking about the impact from a structural level down to how we communicate with each other about aging, and providing opportunities for people to contextualize aging, their own age, invest in their aging early. Imagine if it was like a world where we weren't just financially planning for later life, but emotionally preparing for later life, and what we wanted to do with our time and what we wanted to give to the world. These are easy conversations that we can have. I don't know if y'all know the altar program, but we have the altar program. And so we embed these conversations in churches and in congregations. And it's a great opportunity to start to have these conversations with people of all ages.
One question from the virtual wall. At what age do you start elderhood?
That's a great question. Okay, so I'm glad you asked this. There's no one age that we start elderhood. There's no one path. At what age do we start adulthood? Is it 18 because that's when we're entitled to something? Is it 21 because that's when we can drink? Like, there isn't an age. It depends on how you define what adulthood is. Elderhood is the same thing. You know 65 is arbitrary. You all know it just came from Germany, Otto von Bismarck, so that he could establish a pension plan for people who lived primarily till the age of 63 at that time, which is why he chose 65. So it would be a benefit for just a small number of people, and then 65 just stuck. But there's nothing magical about 65. So it depends on the person.
Interesting. Another one, could you share more thoughts on clinical strategies specific to mitigating suicide risk among older adults that take into consideration your findings about internalized ageism?
I wish Erin was here because I've been working with Erin about that. And we have been working on trying to develop some clinical guidelines, or at least some questions that can ask people those, they were kind of 2 trigger questions about how you feel about your own aging that were the most likely to lead to suicidal ideation. So working on it, and we'll hopefully have something soon.
Thank you. I have more of a comment. I know that we talked about a podcast that is becoming more famous, is an older, well, a I don't know if I'm allowed to say the words or the title, but somebody that actually has been interviewing elder women to learn from them. And of all the women that have been interviewed, I've only heard of one that the question, actually, one of the first question is, what is your age? And then the follow-up is, and how do you feel? You know, and there's only one person that I have heard, Fran Lebowitz, who said, I'm 72. And how do you feel? Is like 85. And she said, the reason why I say that is because I've always felt older. I'm actually old for my age. So a very interesting take. Any other questions before we close?
I'm just wondering if there was data that you looked at post-pandemic for those that, you know, many people lost family members, friends. Was there any like change in how people felt? Oh, I'm still here. I have a chance to change ways that I live or my values really consider. I'm wondering if there was any data on that, because it was such a hard time. So many people died, and yet how do you make meaning of all of that?
Yeah, not that I've seen, but what I did think was interesting is when you looked at kind of some research on resilience during the pandemic, one of the most resilient group of people was older people. And in part, it's because like I've been through hard things. I've done this before. I'm not going to get as panicked as somebody who may be experiencing something like this for the first time. So another one of those kind of gifts of later life is like, yeah, all right, been here, done that. I have much more of a sense of calm about me. So I did read that, but I haven't looked at that. It'd be interesting to see if it existed. Yeah.
One more.
I actually placed calls during the pandemic to see how older adults were doing, and I was expecting, oh, I'm having this. They were all great.
See? Yeah. It's so interesting.
Well, no more questions, but a lot of kudos and appreciation, and yes, positive comments from the virtual audience, and I'm sure from the people here as well. Thank you so much